In 1816, English poet Percy Bysshe Shelley stood at the foot of the snow-capped Alps, completely overwhelmed. And then he wrote, "The everlasting universe of things flows through my mind and rolls its rapid waves, now dark, now glittering, now reflecting gloom, now blending splendor." And then somewhere between 1912 and 1922, Rainer Maria Rilke stood on a cliff above the Adriatic Sea and wrote, "For beauty is nothing but the beginning of terror, which we are still just able to endure." So what do these two moments have in common? They both describe beauty not as pleasure, but as the edge of something dangerous, something that threatens to swallow you whole. In this episode, we're talking about Romanticism. And please do not mistake this for romantic as we know it today. So it's not romcoms, it's not dating apps, but Romanticism as in the real thing, the literary, artistic, philosophical revolution of the 1800s that had nothing to do with love or romance. Okay, so it's an academic term, Romanticism with a capital R. It's about awe, longing, wonder, ache. And at the center of all of this is this concept of the sublime, that strange feeling you get when you're face to face with something that is just too big, too beautiful, and maybe even too scary or infinite to fully comprehend. Okay, so pretend we're tucked away in a candlelit library and there's rain falling against the windows. Are you ready? Welcome back to Lost and Found, the podcast where we're figuring things out in real time, together. I'm your host, Carmen Vit, and today we're diving into one of my favorite revolutions in history, the Romantic movement. I'm going to walk you through what it can still teach us today about being human. Okay, so what was Romanticism? Like I said, it was a revolution, but not a revolution with muskets and flags. It was a creative revolution, an emotional one, an intellectual one. And it kind of was this uprising that swept through Europe and North America around the late 18th and early 19th century. It was a rebellion of sorts, but not of armies, of artists, painters, poets, philosophers, standing up against the cold, metallic rise of industry, reason, science, order. So, okay, they weren't anti-intellect, but they were anti-disconnection. See, just before the Romantics came, there was this thing that we call the Age of Enlightenment in academia. And it's a time defined by logic, measurement, rationality. And the whole idea behind the Enlightenment was that if we think better, we can live better. And yeah, to be fair, it brought us many amazing things. I mean, think modern science, secularism, democracy. For sure, Enlightenment has a lot to do with how modernity turned out. But along with that also came factories and smoke and children working in coal mines and just a world that was fast becoming disenchanted. So think forests being cut down for progress and overall feelings and sentimentality, and anything that goes beyond pure cold logic were kind of seen as a weakness. But the Romantics, the Romantics said, wait, what about awe? What about mystery? What about the parts of being human that cannot be measured? So they didn't want to deny reason. They just didn't want it to be the only thing guiding us because they believed in the depth of the human soul. And yes, they were a bit dramatic because they really were into these concepts of melancholy, solitude, but also imagination and inner truth. The point is they believed in the individual. They believed, yes, that we were flawed and feeling and fragmented, but that in itself is sacred. And it's beautiful. I remember learning about the Romantic movement in my third year of university. We had a whole course about it. And I was just so sucked into that world. I would spend long hours in Stellenbosch's library, illegally sipping coffee that I stuck in and just reading all these romantic poets, their work and essays about the sublime. And it really introduced me to a way of living that definitely changed me for the better. And I hope to give this gift to you. Okay, so who were the Romantics? Who do you need to read to really get into this world? Some of the famous names are William Wordsworth. I mean, he was writing about lonely clouds and daffodils that echo in memory long after they're gone. That type of thing. And Samuel Taylor Coleridge, he was spinning these hypnotic verses about ancient mariners and haunted seas. And then, of course, the ultimate sad, sexy poet, equal parts scandal and genius. Of course, I'm talking about Lord Byron. And then Mary Shelley, who wrote Frankenstein at 18 and practically invented science fiction. And then, of course, her husband, Percy Bysshe Shelley, who gave us Mont Blanc, a poem about nature's terrifying beauty. And John Keats, who taught us that beauty is truth and that truth is beauty. And there were so many women, but sadly during this time, they were really silenced and sidelined. So think about Charlotte Smith, Anna Letitia Barbauld, and Mary Wollstonecraft. These women brought a rawness and an intimacy and political insight into their work that kind of questioned this male, egocentrical, romantic notion of the solitary wanderer. Remember, because obviously back in those days, you really couldn't be a woman solitary wanderer. It just was unheard of, unsafe. I mean, I guess today that's still the case. But anyway, so this idea of the individual, the observer, think Charles Baudelaire, the flaneur, the wanderer, this solitary figure observing the world, that's very romantic in essence. And then the woman in this tradition kind of muddled that image a bit and questioned it. They added a nuance and tenderness to critique this idea of the masculine sublime. Okay, so yes, Romanticism was mainly poetry, but it was also philosophy, it was painting, and in that, it kind of became a way of living. It was about possibility, about what it meant to be fully alive in a world that was moving too fast. And believe it or not, this movement that started as a poetry movement became something that actually inspired real-life political revolutions. Think the French Revolution, the American Revolution, the Haitian Revolution. Because at the core of the Romantic movement is this idea that every person has inner worth, that emotion matters, that beauty and art can be forms of resistance, that we are free, subjective beings. All of these things are ideals that really influence these big revolutions in history. So we have the poets to thank for a lot of that, right? It's radical. And it also laid the groundwork for conservation movements, because Romantic poets also wrote a lot about nature as something to be preserved, the source of the sublime. They really saw nature not as a resource, but as something sacred that deserved our protection. So the Romantics weren't just dreamers, right? They were responding to the world that they were in. A fraught one at the time, so they were responding to capitalism, colonialism, conformity, and they were asking this question: what do we lose when we stop being moved by the world? So when we see everything through a lens of utility, what can this do for us? How can we extract from nature? What can we gain through this relationship? It kind of links up with a lot of the stuff that we've been talking about lately in some of the previous episodes. I mean, think about Martin Buber's I, it, and I, thou relationship that we talked about in the episode about main character energy. So how we relate to people, but it also links with the whole episode about critical theory and the Frankfurt School and what Herbert Marcuse had to say about this logic of utility that just takes over everything under capitalism and doesn't leave space for anything of inherent value. So if you're interested in that, go listen to those episodes. But anyway, back to the Romantic movement. Now we kind of see Romanticism that came way before these other things really influenced so much of what we experience as modern culture. Okay, but now let's talk about the sublime. This is such a fascinating concept, and it's really at the center of Romanticism. And I know you've heard the word before, right? Somebody probably have said like, oh, that's sublime. But you probably don't know exactly what it means, especially in the academic sense. Okay, imagine you're at the edge of a cliff. The ocean below you is dark and endless. Waves are crashing like thunder. The wind roars in your ears and whips your hair across your face. And you feel tiny. You feel terrified. But also you feel completely and utterly alive. That feeling, that's the sublime. And the Romantics were obsessed with it. So the sublime refers not to beauty in the usual sense, like symmetrical faces or delicate flowers, but it refers to a kind of dangerous beauty, the kind that stirs something deep and animal in you, and the kind that makes you forget yourself and then find yourself again in the forgetting. So the term was first used by Edmund Burke in 1757. He was one of the first people to try and define this. And he said the sublime is what happens when we come up against something too big, too powerful, too unknowable. It overwhelms our senses like vast mountains and violent storms and unbearable love. Things that threaten to destroy us, but also invite us in, those kind of things. That's the sublime. And here's the strange thing. He said that feeling of awe, of terror, of trembling in the face of something that is so vast, that is pleasurable. And it reminds us that we're alive. I love that so much. Just talking about it stirs something in me. Okay, but Burke was just the beginning. Then Immanuel Kant came along and he threw this on his head. So there's this whole other notion of the Kantian sublime. And he said, the sublime isn't just out there. It's not just in nature, in danger and beauty that exists outside of us. No. Kant said it's also in here, in the mind, in our own ability to grapple with the external world, with nature. Yes, there is power in nature, but it's not just there. It's also in us, in the trying and the failing to comprehend something beyond comprehension. Right? So you have Edmund Burke saying the sublime is nature and all these amazing, powerful, scary, beautiful things in nature. Then you have Immanuel Kant, who later came and he said, no, the sublime is in us. It's in our ability to actually see it, grapple with it, even though we know we can never understand it. And then the Romantics came and they said, no, it's both. The sublime is what happens in the collision between the internal and the external. So when the vastness of nature and the external world meets the depths of the self, when a thunderstorm cracks something open in you, not just the sky. Okay, so it's emotional, it's spiritual, it's an aesthetic experience. I would like to say sexual even, in that it dissolves boundaries and it demands you to surrender in a way, right? Because the sublime undoes you. It pulls you out of yourself and it completely strips away performance and the ego and this armor of rationality. And it asks you to be completely present with something bigger than you, be it nature or artwork or a piece of writing or yes, even another person. And that, for me, is deeply erotic, because to encounter the sublime is to give up control, to stop thinking and to start feeling instead, to let go of this urge to master or name or explain. It's a kind of a seduction. It's slow and overwhelming, but also impossible to resist. And the most terrifying part is that it leaves you feeling exposed, like a raw nerve. Why? Because it reminds you both how fragile and how infinite you are. And what is erotic if not the tension between vulnerability and power? The sublime touches that same place. I mean, I've had that feeling of the sublime the first time I caught a wave during a surfing lesson. And I had that feeling when I was walking home here in Hanoi just a week ago, and it was 3 a.m. I'm by myself, I'm listening to music, and the sky just suddenly cracks open, and this insane storm comes up. Like, literally, I think the trees in front of me are gonna blow over. The rain is falling down so hard it hurts my skin. And I just throw out my arms and I put my face up to the sky and I just start laughing. It was such an intense moment. That was definitely for me an encounter with the sublime. I also felt it when I went bungee jumping back in South Africa at the world's tallest gorge. That moment when you're peering over the cliff and your heart is just beating outside of your chest, and you see how far down it is, and you feel the cool spray from the waterfall that is right below you, and you're going to be jumping down there. That moment, all you can think about is how beautiful and terrifying this is, how alive you are. That's the sublime. And you get that too sometimes when you're on the edge of something with someone, you look into their eyes and you know you're gonna fall. Like, this is gonna be intense. You can get that when you're looking at an artwork that really stirs something in you. So that's the thing. For the earlier philosophers and poets like Edmund Burke, it really was just nature. And then you get the philosophers following from that, like Immanuel Kant, who said, no, it's just in the experience that we have in our heads. But the Romantics, I think, got it right in saying that it's the collision of the internal and the external. When we meet something that's beautiful and terrifying that we cannot fully comprehend, and then how we grapple with that in our own inner self, that's where the sublime comes up. And that can be an encounter with nature, yes, but it can also be an encounter, like I said, with so many other things that just makes us feel like, wow, that just feels like bigger than us. I invite you to think about when the last time was that you felt that. After the episode is over, think about when's the last time you felt the sublime, when you felt beautifully, terrifyingly alive. Okay, so why were the Romantics so drawn to this idea of the sublime? Obviously, besides everything that we just talked about. They were drawn to this idea because they believed the world was fragmented. And they thought that the sublime was one of the very few things that made us feel whole, or at least made us feel a longing for wholeness. Isn't that interesting? Let's sit with that for a second. And I think it's so relevant today because we're running around, we're doing our day-to-day tasks, you have your to-do list, you're waking up, you're working, going to school, working out, whatever. And we kind of lose touch with this beautiful, terrifying, almost spiritual layer of what it actually means to be human and encounter the world. It's interesting how for them, they thought the same thing. And this was like 200 years ago, right? They felt the same way about how humans are just fatigued with life. They said that we in our inner worlds are fragmented because there's just no connection anymore, no connection with our inner self or with life. But the sublime, that moment where you are forced to encounter the fact that you are alive, which if you think about it philosophically, is terrifying. That, they said, is the only time when we can really feel whole. But here's the thing, the sublime doesn't offer tidy answers. It doesn't resolve the ache, but it dignifies it. It says, yes, the world is vast. Yes, you are small. And yes, it is still worth being moved. The sublime turns longing into meaning, if only for a second. And it says, feeling deeply, even when it hurts, isn't a flaw. Feeling deeply is proof that you're paying attention. And artists, They tried to capture it, this feeling. They tried to paint it, write it, translate it, knowing full well that they'd fail. That's the point. The point of the sublime is that it cannot be captured. But they tried anyway, because even just the attempt brought them closer to the mystery. I mean, Shelley wrote, "The everlasting universe of things flows through the mind." Everything flows through the mind, comes through your inner world. And in that flow, we touch something eternal. So the Romantics were not writing textbooks. I'm sure you're getting that now. They weren't trying to catalog facts or deliver tidy morals to us. They were trying to capture this feeling. They were obsessed with it. And they wanted to make you, the world, feel something so deeply that it cracked the numbness of modern life. And in that lies the revolution. They believed that imagination was not a distraction from reality, but a way into it. That the subjective, what's in us, the emotional, the personal, the intuitive, is not a weakness to overcome, but a truth to be honored. Because the age of enlightenment, and everybody who was saying rationality, reason above all anything else, said we need to be objective. But the artist said there is no such thing as objectivity. The subjective is the real truth because it's your truth that we should honor. And so their art didn't always make sense in the traditional way because they all wanted to tap into this aesthetic, fragmented feeling. And it was lush and melancholy and dreamlike and often contradictory. Why? Because so is life. And they were trying to write what it feels like to be a human being standing before the vastness of the world, aching to understand it and knowing that you never fully will. And this is what made their work so revolutionary. In the wake of the Enlightenment, with its sterile science and clean logic, like we said, the Romantics said, no, we are not machines. We are not meant to be efficient. We are meant to feel. We are meant to rage against injustice and get goosebumps from a single line of poetry and to cry at sunsets and kiss like we mean it. We are meant to ache and long and wonder, and through that we become fully alive. That is, wow. I love that. And so they painted storms, and they wrote odes to nightingales, and they wept over daffodils, and they described mountains and love not as geological forms or objective observations, but as metaphors for the soul. They weren't trying to solve life. They were trying to touch it through art. Wow. Okay, but now the question you've been waiting for. What does this mean for us today? Because let's be honest, most of us aren't standing in the Alps or writing poetry by candlelight. I know that. We are scrolling and tapping and swiping, and we're sitting on the bus and running to meetings and opening up our Slack and all these things, we're studying, whatever. So what can we learn from these poets? They lived on cliff sides. We live on sidewalks in 3-story crumbling walk-up apartments, and our days are filled with notifications and deadlines and white lattes. So what can a bunch of 19th century poets obsessed with clouds and melancholy possibly teach us about life in the 21st century? A lot, actually. That's what I have to say. Bear with me. Okay, so like I said, the Romantics weren't just writing about nature. This is very important. It's a misconception that a lot of people have. They were writing about how to feel, how to be cracked open by beauty again and notice the world and then honor that emotion, even and especially when it doesn't make sense. And in a time like ours, I think, where everything is optimized and monetized and neatly explained, to be cracked open by beauty, to notice the world, is radical. That is a revolution in itself. So the sublime reminds us you don't need to understand something for it to move you, and you don't need to capture it or post it or make it productive. You just need to feel. So if you think of that dizzying view from a rooftop, or that moment that this song just made your chest ache with its beauty, or that flash of connection with a stranger, that sense that for a second there's something more pulsing under the surface of everything, that is the sublime, and it matters. Not for some social media aesthetic, it matters for your humanity. Because when you allow yourself to be moved and to feel small and overwhelmed and humbled by the terrifying beauty of the world, that's when you come back into contact with wonder. And wonder is the opposite of numbness. It's the first step back into being alive, into being awake in your own life. And I would argue because of that, it's the first step back into meaning. That's why it matters. So if we could resurrect the Romantics and put them in our world, what would they tell us? What can we learn from them? What practical advice would they give you and me, a 20-something navigating, rent and heartbreak and creative burnout and sometimes a rising sense of existential dread? What would they tell us? First of all, they would say, stop trying to be productive all the time. Wordsworth will never tell you to hustle. He will tell you to wander. He literally wrote an entire poem about floating around like a cloud. Like, these people were not practical. And I love that. Okay, so they would tell you to take a walk, not for steps. And also, this one is going to hurt me specifically. Not to listen to an audiobook, not to listen to a podcast. And I love doing that. Like going for long walks and listening to a podcast or an audiobook. One of my favorite things to do. But no. They would tell you, just take the walk for no reason at all. No distraction in your ear. Let your mind move at the pace of your feet. Look at things, smell things, touch the tree, and get back into the world. So practically also, I think this could look like if you're at work, take your lunch break, go outside, walk around a bit, take off your shoes, feel the ground beneath your feet, even if people think that's weird. I love doing that. Okay, secondly, they would say be alone more often and don't rush to fill the silence, because the Romantics knew that the sublime usually, mostly, arrives in solitude. So definitely not something you're going to get in a club or in a group chat or when you're refreshing Instagram for the third time before bed. All of those things, like time spent with friends, they valued, but they just didn't think that that's necessarily a route to really tapping into the sublime, because it's such a subjective experience. It's something that you really need to feel within yourself, mostly. So the Romantics believed that your internal world was just as rich as the external one, and that the best art came from the collision between those two. So give yourself that chance to collide with something. Go somewhere alone, to a mountaintop, a museum, take a night walk, and just feel the magnitude of what it stirs in you without distraction. Thirdly, they would tell you to make art that feels bigger than you. So write the poem that you're scared to show anyone. Sing with your whole chest. Paint what you can't put into words. Take photos of shadows and eyes and ruins and kisses and skies, even if nobody sees it. In fact, especially if nobody sees it, just make something that tries to capture that bigness that you feel, Because that's what they did over and over again. And that's how they stayed alive in the world, by creating, not just consuming. 4, let yourself long for things. The Romantics did not shy away from yearning. They wrote symphonies and soliloquies about it. And I think that today this is really interesting because we're in a world that's so obsessed with being chill, with detachment, with, being cool and aloof and wait 8 hours to text them, all those things. I think there is something gorgeously rebellious about wanting something deeply, whether that's beauty or love or connection or freedom or just a better view. Let yourself ache for it. Be unapologetically obsessed because otherwise, what is the point? Why are we here? Desire is not weakness, it's aliveness and it's rare. If you want to walk through your life being numb, being cool and aloof, I'm just sorry I can't be obsessed with something. Have passion. That's what we're here for, in my opinion, and in the opinion of the Romantics. And then following from that so nicely, number 5 is learn how to be moved again without needing to explain why, because not everything has to make sense. Not every moment needs a moral message or a takeaway. I think that some things just need to be felt. And the Romantics weren't trying to tie things up in neat little bows. They were just trying to stand in the chaos and say, yes, this too is life. Beautiful, terrifying, wild, unfinished. And I want to be awake for all of it. Number 6 is invitation. This is something the Romantics, I think, would tell you to do, but this is definitely something I'm telling you to do. This week, do something dangerous. Yeah, I'm serious. Not reckless, walk in the middle of Johannesburg at night alone as a woman. That's not what I'm saying. Not something stupid. I'm talking about something that will make your rational mind flinch, but your soul lean in. Something like climbing to the top of a mountain and standing close to the edge and looking out to that view and yelling at the top of your lungs. Something like going skydiving or going skinny dipping or kissing that person that you wanted to kiss or starting the project with no guarantee that you will succeed or booking the one-way flight, saying the thing that you've been holding in, that type of thing. Learn how to ride a motorcycle if that's what you've always wanted to do. Learn how to skate. Risk something. I mean, we all got to be beginners at something at some point. So that thing that scares you that you've always wanted to do it. Do something dangerous this week that will make your pulse rise to remind you that you are a living, breathing human being, not just someone scrolling and lying in fetus position and hunched over a laptop. And here's the thing that I love about the Romantics. Yes, they were deep thinkers and they were poets and wanderers, but they did not play it safe. They stood on the edge of cliffs and wandered into the snowy Alps by themselves just to feel something. And they broke open their hearts without letting heartbreak harden them. And they did all of this in the name of art, just trying to feel something. And they knew that danger, the right kind of danger, reminds you that you are alive because it edges you towards the sublime. That moment where beauty meets fear, meets awe, meets you. Just standing there, breathless, with your whole body saying, yes. So go. Do the dangerous thing. Risk something. You were made for it. Honestly, I think that if the Romantics were to see us today, they would be really deeply worried. Because we live in a time where it's easy to just never feel anything. We can scroll so much that we forget what hunger feels like. Not just forget to eat, but that sense of hunger for meaning, beauty, and depth. I mean, we literally have a word for it. We call it brain rot. Think about that. Think about the fact that the algorithm doesn't want you to be awestruck. It wants you to be pacified and overstimulated, but emotionally flatlined. It wants consumption, not contemplation. It wants noise, not nuance. And the thing that the Romantics knew that I'm slowly relearning is that feeling is a form of resistance, and creating something, even if it's just a few lines of messy poetry, or maybe baking something that's too sweet, or finger painting, just the act of creating is radical. The world will try to flatten you, to package things up and make them easily digestible, but you don't have to accept that. Even back then, they were warning their peers that the people who advocate for just objectivity and rationality and sense above all else are completely missing the point. Because in a world addicted to apathy and order, aliveness is the revolution. Wow, and talking about all of this now, it makes me realize how perfectly it ties in with what I'm trying to do with the podcast, with Lost and Found. Because if the Romantics were trying to feel again, to push back against this disenchanted world and kind of reclaim beauty and depth and mystery and longing, and that's exactly what I'm trying to do here. Maybe this podcast has been my little rebellion. It's been like a love letter to the ache of being alive, let's say. And I hope that it's a reminder to you that it's okay and necessary even to feel deeply, to be moved, to wander, to wander, to wander, to wonder. Yeah, you get it. And just to long for something more. And maybe that's what I mean when I say lost. Not lost in that you failed, but lost in that you're in motion, that you've stepped off the path in search of something real, and found not in a destination, but found in a moment. That moment when something clicks and opens up. So yeah, maybe this isn't just a podcast, but a revolutionary romantic act. That's how I like to think of it from now on. And I'm glad you're here for it. Because the fact that you're listening to it means that you are a revolutionary too. Okay, that's it for today's episode of Lost and Found. If this stirred something in you, if it made you want to throw your phone into a lake and run barefoot into the mountains, or at the very least light a candle or read a poem, or finally take that walk that you've been putting off, then you are exactly who I made this for. Share this episode with someone who maybe likes poetry or needs a pick-me-up, or maybe someone who is on the edge of something so brave and they just need that final nudge. And if you haven't yet, please subscribe, follow wherever you listen. We do this every week, so come join us. Also, I'm really excited for the episode that's coming out on Monday. It's going to be another one for us book lovers. So a month ago, I started the Lost and Found book club. And this past month, we've been discussing our first month's pick, which is Thirst for Salt by Madeline Lucas. It was incredible. And so on Monday, I'm going to do a whole tie-in episode. We'll be talking about themes from the book, how we felt, what we discussed in the book club group chat. So we'll be talking about desire, big age gap relationships, mother-daughter silences, and just kind of what it means to be young and stupidly in love, you know, all the lost and found things. So if you've read the book, I think you'll love the episode, but if you haven't, don't worry, you'll still get a lot of value from it. And if you want to join the book club just in time for the announcement of next month's pick, then just hit the link in the show notes. Okay, my dear ones, go be wild, be curious, and as always, don't forget to get a little bit lost this weekend. That's where the magic finds you. Until next time.